Good morning and welcome to Pastor Abilities. I'm David Green, and we've got some fun stuff set up for this morning. For those who are teaching and preaching the Bible, what I'm doing here is a Bible study. It's certainly open for anybody who'd like to participate, but it really is intended with a little bit of extra material at the end. That's intended for those who are teaching and preaching from the Bible. So, whether you're a Sunday school teacher, or if you work at a Christian school, or if you're simply hosting a Bible study for some of your friends, this is an effective way for you to prepare and then take a lesson in with them. People ask me from time to time why I do this. I certainly was very privileged. Did not expect it in my lifetime, but I was very privileged to get a high-end education in biblical studies with a handful of world-famous scholars, and they shaped my understanding of Scripture forever. And I want to take what my mentors shared with me and to share that with you as well. I also will talk at the end about ways that a preacher might approach this text on a Sunday morning. That this is something that's not just intended for you to have for yourself, but for you to be able to share with others as well. And I think we're going to have a good time going through the things that we have set up for this morning. So let me talk a little bit about what we have going on here. This is not the screen I was looking for. Let me remove that one and try adding this. There we go. That's the screen I'm looking for. This week is I'm looking at the third lesson in a three-part series, The Inviting Word of the Lord. So here's what we've covered so far. I started with Jeremiah, the dangerous word of the Lord. And for those who teach and preach from the Bible, that's a very appropriate title. I certainly think not only of what Jeremiah had to say for those of us who preach the word, that we are not to add to it or subtract from it. It's a very dangerous thing that we do. We ought to tread lightly and be careful. The comforting word of the Lord, how God comforts people in difficulty and in pain. And then what we have this week is the inviting word of the Lord. Now, the screen that I have here, this image is something that I've used in the church publications where I'm preaching. I get to preach at the First Presbyterian Church in Huntsville, Texas. That's almost all I do for them. I have a Wednesday evening Bible study for some folk that show up. That's not live streamed. And then I have the sermon on Sunday morning. And as somebody who has preached literally for decades and been a public speaker for decades before that, even way back to when I was a kid, I was giving speeches in public. And so this is something that I've done for a very long time. Teaching from the Bible is something that I enjoy a great deal, and I'm glad to do it. So this Sunday, you'll see a couple of items here. In the United States, this is Labor Day weekend. Labor Day here is observed as a national holiday in the U.S. on the first Monday of September. And this year, the schedule is, I use the word wonky. It's not quite right because the 1st of September is the Monday. So here we are still in August. And so it feels strange to people's calendars. For those of us of a certain age and older, it feels a little strange because school started 2 weeks ago. Kids have been in class for 2 weeks. My sweet bride, who is a teacher, has been at work for 4 weeks now. And so that's just part of the craziness of the schedule that we have here. Now, the congregation where I get to preach has a tradition around Fifth Sundays. Fifth Sunday, there is a potluck supper, and I know that's something to look forward to. And also, there's a service project. This little congregation, they what they do for service in the community. If this church were to fold up its doors and close its doors and roll up its sidewalks, the community would be at a tremendous loss. They've provided school supplies for dozens of children. They paid for school lunches for hundreds of children this past school year. They provide food 365 days a year. There's a little box in front of the church. You don't even have to fill out a form. If you're hungry, take canned goods out of that box, and somebody restocks that literally every day. It was vandalized not too long ago, and a day later, somebody from the church had taken the vandalized box home, repaired it. It wasn't down for 48 hours, maybe 24 to 36 hours. I'm not sure when it was first damaged. They provide an enormous amount of support to people in the community. And they build that into a service project on the fifth Sunday. So not just the adults during the weekday, but whole families can come and participate together. And it's a tremendous thing that they do. Now, I don't know what the project is for this Sunday. One of the characteristics of this congregation is very, very high functioning teams. That's why, just in the 10 hours a week that I give to them, we're able to do so much because I really am trying to stay out of the way of some very effective, high functioning teams. This Saturday is going to be a special day at the church, working with a number of mission partners, including at least 3 other congregations that are not Presbyterian, the food bank out of Houston, Texas, and the local school district. There will be a truck coming into Huntsville, Texas to deliver food on Saturday morning. There's a park, if you will, across the street from the church. It used to be a school, but they've taken the building down. And there's a driveway that's just perfect for people to be able to come right in. And I should also mention the Lions Club of Huntsville, helping relieve hunger is one of the goals of Lions internationally. And so they've provided a grant to buy the tables from which the food will be distributed. It's an amazing partnership driven by somebody with connections to our congregation. And that's what they tend to do. So I mention that because your congregation will be different. I don't know what your fifth Sunday traditions are, or if you have them, or what your holiday traditions are for weekends, holiday weekends with the national holiday. But whatever it is, accommodate that into your sermon and your lesson. What's happening in your community should be a part of what's happening here. And so I encourage y'all to do that. Part of what we're going to be looking at this week are the parables of Jesus, the parables of Jesus. And so let me, as I change screens here, the parables of Jesus. So how to introduce them. A parable is a story with a point. And I don't see this word used outside of the Bible, but certainly these kinds of teachings are pretty common to us, even in children's stories, or I should say, especially in children's stories. A parable in the Bible, I've heard it described different ways. An earthly story with a heavenly meaning. I'm not sure where that came from, but that's one of the phrases that comes to my mind. It's a story where the larger meaning is simplified. It's a story that people can relate to, but it has a larger meaning. It has that impact of a much bigger meaning for people to be able to walk away with. So in the Bible, Jesus teaches using parables. And I've seen different accounts for how many parables he uses. It depends on how you count them. But if you go to the final authority on all things, Wikipedia, you'll find, I looked it up, the 38 parables inside the Bible is what they list. Now, I've seen as few as 17. Here you see 38. I like that the Wikipedia page gives you reference to where you find them. These are found in what we call the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. As I scroll through, sorry about that. The Synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now, that's the order we have them in the Bible. There's a question as to the order in which they were written. Matthew and Mark were very, very early, very, very early testamentary stories about Jesus. They came very quickly after the resurrection of Jesus. So Jesus would have been crucified plus or minus AD 33. And so these parables are going to show up, or these stories are going, you back up. Matthew and Mark are going to show up in part of an oral tradition very, very quickly. They're going to be committed to writing within a few decades after the resurrection. And I want you to think about the importance of that speed with which they are reduced to paper, because people who walked and talked with Jesus, people who saw him on the cross, people who saw him alive after he had been buried, are alive when these are being circulated. Now, one that comes a little bit later is the Gospel of Luke. Actually, let me back up just a quick note. Now, some scholars are going to disagree with what I'm saying, and they're welcome to be wrong, but that's okay. The Gospel of Mark really doesn't appear to me to be in its finished form. It's almost like somebody's making notes. One day when I write this story, I want to include these things. And so when you read Mark's gospel, there are times where the locations and the timing don't line up. And so it doesn't make a smooth story to read from beginning to end. Matthew, however, is in the form of a finished story. There's a marvelous book published in the late 1960s called Matthew as Story, written by a man named Jack Kingsbury. Dr. Kingsbury was one of my most influential mentors in biblical scholarship. Um, a tremendous friend to me, and we have great memories of Dr. Kingsbury and his wife when we all lived in Virginia. He would come over to my house on Thursday afternoons and quiz me on how I was doing. His wife would come have dinner with us. Dr. Kingsbury, very early in his career, published this book, Matthew as Story, and it really changed the way a lot of people read the Bible because oh yeah, it's a story. In the Gospel of Matthew, you have this complete story of the birth and presentation of Jesus, of his earthly life and his journey towards Jerusalem, where he suffers and dies and is crucified and raised from the dead. Beautiful story, the way it's told in Matthew. Another finished story here is in the Gospel of Luke. And the Gospel of Luke is a very different kind of story. Luke begins by saying that he's researched these things for himself, and he's reporting this to someone named Theophilus. And this is very important because Luke is written in the form of a first century biography. It's not a unique form of story in and of itself. There are other kinds of first century biographies that you can find, and you'll find they're written very much like the Gospel of Luke. Luke gets called the physician, if you will. Luke, the physician. There wasn't a Western style medical school in the ancient Near East. It's not that. It's that Luke was clearly educated. Clearly educated. So how do I make that statement? Luke is written in a very advanced form of Greek. In Greek, there are 250 some odd verb forms. And when you learn ancient Greek, what you're really learning is how nouns, how nouns are structured, but you're really going to focus on these verbs. It's almost like memorizing mathematical formula. And that was difficult for me. I will admit, reading Greek is a whole lot more fun than learning Greek, just for what it's worth. And I can tell you from my experience, just going to tell you from my experience, if you're taking biblical Greek, Koine Greek, your first hour of class, your 1 hour of class, and you are very likely to be reading from the Gospel of John because the style of Greek is very simple. And John's just a very different style of literature than the Synoptic Gospels. But the Gospel of John is a very simple verb structure. Now, there is one very quirky structure in the Gospel of John, chapter 1, which is how we know that Jesus was with God and he was God, not just another God, that Jesus is fully human and fully divine. That's set out very clearly in the Gospel of John, chapter 1. But it is a little quirky how that construction happens. But the vocabulary, the crossover to English is very similar. And so it's not that difficult once you learn the alphabet and how things are pronounced to pick up the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1, and begin reading in Greek. That's day one of Greek school. If you stay in school long enough to do doctoral level Hebrew and Greek, or Greek in particular, your exams in doctoral level Greek are going to include passages from First Peter and from the Gospel of Luke. And Luke and Acts are the same author and same style of writing. And they really are written as two parts. So read Luke and then read Acts right on its heels, and it'll make a whole lot more sense. But the style of writing is very advanced. Luke is writing for a literate crowd. And that's interesting. I hear people talk about Luke writing for a Jewish audience, and there's certainly truth to that. But more specifically, I think Luke's writing to an educated audience because he's using complex structure in the literature in the way that he's presenting his case. And so we think of Luke as the physician because of that. And so keep that in mind whenever you're teaching or even reading out of the Gospel of Luke. Keep in mind that Luke is writing for this academic, well-educated, that's the phrase. He's writing for a well-educated audience. And that's just very important for you to keep in mind when you teach from the Gospel of Luke. So let's turn our attention now to Luke chapter 14. This is where I have the text for today coming from. Let me get that queued up on the Bible here. You would think, like once again, but I actually ran through the Bible study, and so I had the text at the end of the Bible where we're going, not where we are now. So let me simply add that up to the stage here and lift that up just a little bit there. So here we have Luke chapter 14. Now, where we are here, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He's already made his change to head towards Jerusalem. And Luke doesn't line up in structure just exactly the same way that Matthew does. Matthew, it's super clear, the beginning, the presentation of Jesus, the presentation of Jesus, his earthly ministry of teaching, preaching, and healing, and then the journey towards Jerusalem. Luke, it's not exactly as clear how that's going to happen, but Luke does make clear that Jesus at this point is on his way to Jerusalem. When you read Luke, you're going to get clues as to where Jesus is. And don't just pay attention to the headings on the Bible, because sometimes those will lead you astray. For every Bible, read the text, read the text itself, not focusing on the headings. But what you get in the 14th chapter is very characteristic of Luke. The location and the time. The location and the time are going to tell you where Jesus is. The location and the time tell you where he is and when it is. And that's what you get at the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, verse 1. One Sabbath, this is Jesus, one Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. Okay, that's why I included the first verse in the reading, even though the parables I'm talking about will be 7 through 14. Do not overlook this verse. If you are reading, teaching, preaching, do not overlook the time and the location. So when was this? It was one Sabbath. Sabbath was then Saturday. In the mainstream of the Christian tradition, we celebrate the Sabbath on Sunday because that's what we refer to as the day of resurrection. So we worship on the day of resurrection. Was and is the first day of the week, but that's why Sundays are the day that we worship. In this instance, Jesus was Jewish, and so the Sabbath would have been on a Saturday. So he's at a house of a ruler of the Pharisees. Okay, now wait, what's happening here is very important. Pharisees are not a fan of Jesus. So who are the Pharisees? The Pharisees are a group of people who believe that you can uphold the law perfectly. And so they will say they do this, that they uphold the law perfectly. All 600 some odd laws that you find in what we receive as the Hebrew Bible or the Christian Old Testament, 600 some odd, and they will tell you they uphold them perfectly. Now, Jesus will tell you, oh, no, they don't. But that's why I included the text from Jeremiah 2 weeks ago. Oh, no, they don't. They add to it for others. They subtract from it for themselves. See how convenient that is. We're going to make rules. We're going to tell you about the rules that you are expected to follow. And that's different from the rules we're expected to follow. So a few things about the Pharisees you need to know. First of all, they do believe they can uphold the law perfectly and that you should as well. So that's one. The second thing about the Pharisees is that they're going to be very, very well educated in the law. Very, very well educated in the law. There is a rabbi by the name of Gamaliel. His name does appear in the Bible. He had a very famous student, a student who would go on to become more famous than even he. named Saul. Saul was from Tarsus. You know him as Paul, who by his hand we receive much of our New Testament literature. Paul was a Pharisee. And so who are the Pharisees? Within Judaism in the first century, there are a number of sub-traditions. So think of them this way. In modern day Christianity, there's a big bubble, a big umbrella, tent. That's probably the better word, a big tent. And within that tent, there are smaller groups, still big, but smaller groups when compared to the whole over time. So I live in Southeast Texas, and that means there are a lot of Baptists here, a lot of Baptists. Did I mention there are a lot of Baptists? There are also a pretty sizable number of Roman Catholics. If you were to poll people, Roman Catholic and Baptist, depending on which part of town you took that poll, they're going to be the two largest groups that people would identify as being with. Now, they all teach the Bible. They preach that Jesus was raised from the dead. They're very similar teachings. Now, Baptists and Catholics have some pretty significant differences. There are also, say, Methodist, different denominations of Methodist in my own community. It used to be United Methodist, then it became the Untied Methodist. And I've been through church splits over similar issues. And I'm just going to tell you what, God bless our Methodist friends and what they've had to go through of late. It's been tough on them. But then there's also Presbyterians, and there are other Christian denominations just at the right down the street. If I'm just a little over or right about a mile away from a Church of Christ, a Disciples of Christ congregation, a Lutheran congregation, a Presbyterian congregation, a couple of Baptist congregations, an independent non-denominational church, which is fancy for Baptists, but they don't want to admit to it. And that's just within a couple miles of my house. There are that many different Christian denominations. Oh, and Methodist, a large Methodist church, literally just about 200 yards that way. And so there you have that sense that under this big umbrella, big tent, within this big tent, there are Christian denominations, and each of us have some things that differentiate ourselves from others. But for people in the pews, there's not a dime's worth of difference. I mean, the way I preach and the way the Baptist preacher preaches around the corner from me, we are more similar than we are dissimilar. The Lutheran pastor certainly holds the Bible in his hand and holds it of high regard. He and I preach very differently from each other. And I will say, through the years of being here in Conroe, he has been one of the dearest folk I've had the privilege of knowing. Likewise of the Methodist Church, one of their pastors in particular is a cherished friend. And so I tell you that because when you read Pharisees, they're going to be one of these groups under that big tent. So what are some of the other groups? The other one that gets a lot of mention in the Bible is called the Sadducees, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So what's the difference? When you go into Jerusalem in the first century, when you make your way into Jerusalem, what you're going to see in the temple is a different style of worship. People are coming into the temple courts, and you can go into that part of Jerusalem today. It actually is part of Palestine, right there in the middle of Jerusalem. But that is a Palestinian controlled territory and the government of Israel has preserved that. Even when they could have undone it, they have chosen not to. You have a monument, the Golden Dome, that is a monument for Muhammad. But then they also have a mosque not far from there. And that's what's there today. In the era of Jesus, you would have had the temple courts, and along the perimeter of the temple courts, you would have had a number of individuals who were selling things. You could buy food, something to drink. More importantly, you could exchange currency from whatever your currency was from where you've traveled from, so that you have the right kind of currency to purchase, and this is important, purchase animals to be sacrificed at the temple. The Sadducees are the ones who sacrifice the animals. The Sadducees are the ones who sacrificed the animals. So they didn't believe in a resurrection. They didn't believe in a bodily resurrection because in their mind, their sacrifice is so perfect that there is no need for a bodily resurrection because they have already atoned for sin. They've already made the atonement for sin. Now, that leaves a gazillion questions in my mind, and I'm not even going to start listing those out here. But the questions you just thought, what about? And does this mean, yeah, I wonder the same stuff too. But hang on to that the Sadducees don't believe in a bodily resurrection. The Pharisees in that same temple court, now, the Pharisees are going to sell you the animal and tell you what animal you need to sacrifice to atone for your sins. Now, just pay attention to the economics of what just happened here, because you go into the temple courts and you bring the currency from whatever country you've come from and you exchange it into the currency of that particular community. Today there's the modern Israeli shekel, but if you so somebody's making money on that exchange. They're not giving you a fair 1-for-1 or a perfect 1-for-1. I mean, fair is a kind of a range. They would say they're giving you a fair exchange, but they are making money doing the exchange. So what do you do? Now, you've taken this money. It's already reduced in value. You go to the Pharisees and find out what it is you need to sacrifice. You pay them for that. And then you go to the tables where you buy the animals. You pay them for that. And then you take that animal to the temple where the Sadducees have set up the system for sacrificing the animals. And you pay them for that too. So you're sacrificing an animal. We read that Mary and Joseph showed up and they made the sacrifice of 2 doves, 2 pigeons, if you will. They were not wealthy. So that would be the appropriate sacrifice to honor the birth of a male child, of a firstborn male child. So they take these animals to the Sadducees. They pay the Sadducees, who then take the animals into the temple, and the animals are sacrificed. Their blood is added to the blood of other animals that are sacrificed that day, and the blood flows out like a stream from the Temple Mount. So many animals are being sacrificed. Now, you've paid the Sadducees for that. It's lunchtime. You're ready to go and get some lunch. So you go to another part where the animals that have just been sacrificed have been roasted and are now available for sale. And guess what? You pay for the animals again. How many times did you pay for that same animal? You paid when you exchanged your currency. You paid when you purchased the animal, or when you found out what animal you needed to have sacrificed. You paid when you purchased the animal. You paid when you offered that animal to the Sadducees for the sacrifice. And then you bought an animal, same animal sometimes, so that you could have lunch. So there's going to be bird that has been roasted. There will be goat, sheep, other animals that have been sacrificed that particular day. But in a sense, one person, one family journeys to Jerusalem. You get up to the Temple Mount and you buy that same animal 5 times. Jesus represented a threat to everybody on that system. So when you read that Jesus, sweet, kind, loving Jesus, who would never raise his voice, or so we would like to think, when he gets up into that Temple Mount, he makes a whip of cords. He throws the tables over. He scatters the money onto the floor, and he drives people out. Sweet, never going to raise his voice, but that's also part of what Jesus does too. Is disrupts this sequence of events so significantly. It's just it's important to remember when you see it, Luke chapter 14, that Jesus is on a Sabbath day. They've criticized him for healing on the Sabbath in the past. He's at a house of the ruler of the Pharisees. So they're the Pharisees, and then they're the rulers of the Pharisees, this governing group, if you will. So this is somebody of importance, and quite possibly somebody who has a vested interest in the death of Jesus. Now, he doesn't think about the resurrection of Jesus. That's not what he's thinking. He's in the house, Jesus is in the house of a ruler of the Sadducees. And what do we read? I think that's the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. So why were they watching him? Remember, there's this economic system that everybody who is making money on it is happy with, where you can show up and pay 5 times for one animal. They're making a lot of money off of people who are poor, people who are sincere and faithful in wanting to observe the law and make sacrifices to atone for their sinfulness, or offer sacrifices in celebration of the birth of a child, or to make amends with a neighbor, or to celebrate a holy day. They are going to Jerusalem, and they are absolutely being, I mean, the word I want to use is fleeced, but that's probably an ironic word to use because that's, it has to do with sheep. But that's what's happening. They're being taken advantage of. It's not a fair system for the people who are coming to Jerusalem. And Jesus knows that. Pharisees probably know it too, but they're not going to admit to it because they are, in their minds, upholding the law. Very, very, very important. Whenever you read or teach or preach from Luke 14, where is Jesus and when is it? It's a Sabbath day, and he's in a house, not just of a Pharisee, of a ruler of the Pharisees. And what's happening throughout that entire evening? They're watching him. Those three foundational facts for what we read in Luke chapter 14 is very, very important. Now, the text that I've selected from the Revised Common Lectionary for the Word of God on this day begins at Luke chapter 14, verse 7. And so I'm going to go ahead and read from this. Let's see what we find. Now, Jesus told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose places of honor. Time out. Whoa, time out. Whoa, 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 whoa. What's happening here? So imagine that you're invited to a meal in the home of somebody who is very famous and very powerful. Where do you sit? Now, I see this because I go to a fair number of dinners where there are going to be speakers or presenters, and these guests are often influential, sometimes literally world famous. And when you get together afterward for lunch, there's a crowd of people, always a crowd of people that want to follow that famous person and sit down and have lunch with that famous person. That group is going to be there always, all the time. They're going to follow that famous person. Why? Because they want to be close to the fame. They want to hear what that person has to say. I mean, there's something really cool about that, isn't there? I mean, it's, I've heard it said in the United States, it was President Clinton who said that everybody, every American should make a point at least once in life of seeing in person a president of the United States. Every person should make a point in life at least once to see a president of the United States. And ironically, President Clinton is the one person I saw in person while he was president of the United States. One of my siblings invited me to a basketball game that was attended by President Clinton. His daughter, Chelsea, it was her birthday weekend, and she had several girlfriends invited with her. And there is something about that. Whether you voted for that person or not, I'm one of those that believes the president is the president. It's very cool. I've met George W. Bush more than once, but that's back in the day when he was an owner of the Texas Rangers and his father was president. But that's a whole other group of stories. I tell you that because, again, think of it. If you have a chance to sit at the same table with the president of your country, whether you voted for that person or not, whether you think highly of that person or not, whether you agree, that's the word, whether you agree with that person or not, you might want to sit next to them, or a famous actor, or a writer whose books have changed your life. A teacher that has that very powerful impact on your life. And if you've been fortunate enough to be educated, you might very well have one of those teachers. You might very well have one of those teachers. I was fortunate to have one of those teachers in high school. I was very fortunate to have one of those teachers in college. And then when I went to graduate school, I was fortunate enough to have really not one, not two, but three of those teachers, one long retired, but I got to work with him in leading worship every week, and profoundly influential mentor. And even then, when I went on to do my doctoral studies, yet another very, very popular writer of his era. was the person who was my advisor, my Dr. Pater, if you will. And these individuals shaped me. And honestly, even though they were at some level famous, people wanted to be close to them. Well, that's what happens here when Jesus is having dinner in the house of a ruler of the Pharisees. He looks at everybody who's invited, and he notices how they choose the place where they want to sit. They all want to sit closest to the person of authority or of power, or the person they recognize as a person of authority. Honestly, that's the right way to word it. They want to sit close to the person they recognize of being higher authority, because Jesus is fully human, fully divine. He is not a God, he is God. He teaches us to pray to God as Father, and he reveals to us the work of God as the Holy Spirit. Jesus is by far the most important person in the room. People don't recognize that. So they go to sit wherever they think there's going to be the most important person, choosing to sit in a place of honor. So, seeing this, Jesus says to everybody in the room these words. When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him, and he who invited you both will come and say, give your place to this person. And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And that's the text that I've chosen for Sunday morning. That's verse 11. That's why that's highlighted. Okay, so within this context, you're in the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, big old honking big deal, a whopper of a big deal, a bona fide, honest to goodness muckety muck. I'm sorry, my South Texan is showing, isn't it? Don't go sit next to the muckety muck. Show reverence for the other people in the room as well. So don't go take the seat right next to the muckety muck, because there might be somebody that he invited that he wants to come and have sit next to him. And he's not going to ask you, he's not going to come to you and say, excuse me. He's not going to raise his hand and say, excuse me, I'd like everybody to move one seat back, which would preserve your place up at the front. Now he could, but Jesus is saying, no, that's not what happens. That is not what's going to happen here. So when the person that the muckety muck wants to sit with arrives and you're in that seat, the host is going to come to you and say, my friend, I'm so sorry. You're sitting in the seat of someone else, but there's an empty seat at the end of the table, way down yonder. And you're going to have to get up, and everybody in the room is going to see it as you move from the place of honor all the way back to the back. And even if you don't know it, they know that you ain't all that. You just ain't all that. And that ought to be embarrassing. Whether you're embarrassed by it or not, it ought to be embarrassing. So as you teach this text, a couple of things that you should pay attention to. Okay, so where are they? They are at a wedding feast. Think of this as, I'm going to highlight this as a light blue here. They're at a wedding feast. This is not the wedding itself. This is the feast that happens afterward. The tradition here is for a big old wedding feast. And let me tell you, in different countries, this happens very, very differently. In the United States, you'll have a sit-down meal, very nice. 100 years ago, literally 100 years ago, There was a book called Etiquette written by a lady named Emily Post. Uh, it's variations of it are still in print today. And I tell you, every adult in North America ought to have one of these, and that includes Mexico and Canada as well, because this gives you rules of etiquette. Okay, so the first edition was published in the 1920s by a lady named Emily Post. Let me set that back down there. Miss Post set out rules of etiquette for weddings, and she said there were three different kinds of wedding. There is the simple wedding, where the bride and groom, ordinarily accompanied by the mother of the bride, will go to the parsonage. That's the house that the church would provide for the pastor to live in. And they would have a small wedding witnessed by the mother of the bride and perhaps the pastor's spouse. And then from there, on a Saturday morning, that couple would then leave the parsonage and go to a celebration breakfast, a breakfast buffet. What a great way to celebrate and have a wonderful day. But that was a very simple wedding. The average fashionable wedding is much like what you see today, bride and groom going, bride being walked down the aisle by her father, the groom at the front of the church. Beautiful imagery there. But then there's going to be a reception, possibly even a sit-down dinner. I was at one of those just not that long ago. 2 weeks ago, I was at one of 10 days ago, I guess I was at one of those. The daughter of a high school buddy got married, and I was privileged to sit at the table with the father of the bride. What a joy it was to see Bill's daughter getting married. So this is a celebration that they are at. And if it's in the home of a ruler of the Pharisees, it's going to be a much bigger deal, a much bigger deal. I was at a church where there were some famous people in the church. Whether you were in the world of politics, Republican or Democrat, there were whoop-de-doos in the church. If you are in the field of business, there were a lot of whoop-de-doos, especially in the field of banking, consulting, very famous people in that day. I had the privilege of officiating one of these weddings, and I knew the bride and groom, and I knew their families, and I forgot that their families were both big deals. And I walk out into the sanctuary with the groom waiting. I had a wedding coordinator at the back of the church to have the ladies come down the aisle at the appropriate time. And I'm thinking it's a wedding of 150, 200 people. And that's a pretty good sized wedding. And I walked out there, and that sanctuary, which seats over 1,000 people, was packed. I mean, it was crowded. Now, it wasn't standing room only, so there must have been 2 or 3 other seats in the room, but there was every bit of 1,000 people, or at least 1,000 people in that room. And I'm walking up there thinking, I should have known. I wouldn't have done anything differently, but I tell you that because that's the kind of wedding you're at. You're at the house of the ruler of the Pharisees. This is somebody who's going to be well known in the community. You're at the wedding feast, joyful celebration. Then there is the place of honor. You're going to see that phrase show up more than once. So I'm going to make that a teal green, place of honor. So do not sit down in the place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you will come and say, give your place to this person, and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. So there is the place of honor. Come on, computer. There we go. Almost. Oh, my goodness. So the place of honor and the lowest place. We're just going to make that a dark orange there. So when you're invited, go and sit in the lower place. Literally the lowest place. So that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher, and there you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. So notice the language of honoring and being honored. Being invited to the wedding banquet, that's an honor. Everybody in that room is somebody in the eyes. They wouldn't invite you if you weren't. everybody in that room is somebody to be honored by the host. And so there you have that. So you've all been invited, and you're equal in that sense. You've all been invited. And if you take that place of honor, when you get excused from that place, the only place left for you is the lowest place, because everybody in the room has taken up all the others. But if you just automatically go to the lowest place and allow respect for everybody else in the room above you, well, the host very well might come to you and say, please come and sit with me. And I'm telling you, there's a lot to be learned here, but it gets summarized in verse 11. Everyone who exalts himself, if you will, celebrates himself, will be humbled. And everyone who humbles himself will be exalted, will be celebrated. There are these perceptions of honor that we have in our world, perceptions of honor that we have in our world. I'm the most honorable person I know. Of course, the host wants me to sit with the host. The host and I know each other. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been invited here. See, it sounds so reasonable when we say it about ourselves, wherever we say it about ourselves. And what we do is take a place of honor that maybe doesn't belong to us. Whoever exalts himself, celebrates himself, if you celebrate yourself, putting yourself above others, you will be humbled. You'll be brought low. But those who stay low and allow others to be celebrated more than you, you will be brought high. That's very, very important for us to remember. Jesus is calling us into relationship with each other from a place of humility. We are all in the body of Christ in a worship service because we have been invited by the maker of heaven and earth, the one who would come into this world in the form of man and die and yet be raised from the dead. We are invited by the resurrected and living Jesus Christ and empowered by the Holy Spirit to be there. Every single one of us has been exalted, not by ourselves, but by the Lord our God. But when we get together, do so from a place of humility. I can tell you some of the most phenomenal, God-fearing people, God-loving people that I've ever known were people who had very important jobs. They were the subject of articles in Forbes magazine, in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, trade journals as well. And I think of one man in particular who had a very impressive title and a ginormous job. And every Sunday morning, he lived in a condo across the street from the downtown church. And he'd show up and he'd check all the pastors used wireless microphones, and he'd check and make sure all of the batteries were good in the wireless microphones, and he'd set them out in a particular place so we all knew when we showed up that he had checked the wireless microphones. And then there was an order as to who had which number wireless. The senior pastor always had, I presume, number one. I don't remember, but it's always easy for the person in the sound booth. What else did he do? He turned on the lights in the building. The custodial staff would do that. He didn't need to, but he did, because it gave him a chance to pray for every room and the lessons that would be taught in that room every day. He went into the sanctuary and turned on the sound system and checked the microphones, which required starting in the balcony, coming down the stairs, going to the front of the church, checking the microphone in the pulpit, going back to the back of the church, up to the balcony to make any adjustments that were needed. And I think most people don't know he did that. I think, honestly, the only reason I knew was because I was one of the pastors and I knew what he did for the microphone. And because I also would go through my rooms early on Sunday morning, we bumped into each other a time or two praying for the different rooms and what was going on in those rooms each Sunday. And that's somebody who humbled himself. He saw a need that he could meet, and make sure that things were ready. He didn't want the pastors to worry about anything but being pastors. And he held us in that level of respect. This is somebody that is in Charlotte, downtown Charlotte. And together we made a number of visits to Montreat, North Carolina. The church held some property and was looking for a house, and we weren't building permit issues. We're not going to let us build the house on that same spot. So the church was looking for other houses, and he and I made several trips to Montreat together. And he always stopped at Bridges Barbecue. I don't remember what town it was in. I know it was on the highway or just off the highway, but he had childhood memories. And every time we were there, he'd tell me about his family and what his family meant to him. Very humble man who managed a multi-billion-dollar portfolio. He humbled himself. He was willing to do the work of the lowest place. I will tell you, some of the most difficult church members I've dealt with are people who had fancy titles, and in their mind, that meant they should receive special privileges from the pastor in the church. And they would want information that was truly not available for anybody else, and they would demand it. They don't want to know how much is given to the church. They want to know who gave. And they want the pastor to take their side in every issue they seem to think. And those folk could be very difficult and sometimes very damaging to a congregation. Honestly and truly, when somebody comes in and starts saying, "You don't know who I am," yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. And if that's you, never say that to your pastor. Never say that to your pastor, because Jesus tells you not to. Don't assume the place of honor. I meant to highlight that a second time. So the place of honor shows up twice. Do that in a teal green, and we're going to make this a more distinguished blue by adding to it a darker blue here. There we go. So everything here is a place of honor. You're at, this person is rich and powerful. There's a family wedding, presumably the bride. You're honored just to be there. Don't take the higher place of honor. And then verse 11, everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. Everyone who humbles himself will be exalted. Now that's 14:7 through 11. I include another paragraph here. Jesus also said to the man who invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors. Just in case you were wondering who was in the room, that's who was in the room. Lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. You will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Okay, there's a lot happening here. Now, he's saying this to the man who invited him. Remember, who invited Jesus? He was a ruler of the Pharisees. So we're going to make that bright red there. So back up to verse 1. He went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees. Why do I highlight this? Remember, that's the man who invited him. He's not just in an ordinary person's house. This person is rich and famous. When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends, your brothers, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. Why not? Lest they invite you in return and you be repaid. Now this, my friends, this is a very important description of why are you inviting people to your house? Why are you inviting them to your house? Well, if you're inviting people to your house with the hopes they invite you to their house, when they invite you to their house, you've been repaid. That's all there is to do this. and I'm going to highlight this one as well. So you're going to see this idea of being repaid showing up over and over and over again, 4 times. Um, there we go, orange one more time. So look at what's happening here. Now I go back to find the 1920s version of Emily Post etiquette online because it is fascinating. For example, in the 1920s, when you host a dinner party, you invite your friends and your neighbors. Why? Because it is expected that if they accept an invitation to your house, they will invite you back to their house. That's how it works in the Emily Post etiquette book. You will be repaid by being invited to someone else's house. I know as a pastor, very often, not always. When I got to Charlotte, a group of young men took me to lunch with them one day. And there were 5 or 6 men, and I mean, they wedged me into the corner of the booth, and I was cornered. And they said, all right, look, we're just going to tell you that we're going to, over your time here in North Carolina, the 5 or 6 of us, we're going to invite you and your wife to different places. We will invite you to restaurants, or we'll invite you to go out. The expectation here is that we're inviting you because you are our pastor. You will not pay. Please do not offer. You will insult us by offering to pay. When we invite you to lunch, it is our treat every time, no exceptions. When we have, they'd say when we invite you, when we have lunch together, it is our treat every time, no exceptions. When we invite you out, our treat every time, no exceptions. And they were true to their word, and honest to goodness, not one of those men ever asked anything of me other than, how else can we help the church? That's all they ever asked. That's all they ever asked. And I know some of what they did behind the scenes, truly awesome. But I can also tell you there are other people when they invite me to lunch and they say, oh, no, my treat. That is not a free lunch. And it's hard sometimes to tell the difference. But I can assure you, there are those people who will come to me and say, I bought your lunch. You owe me this. They want to be repaid. Why are you inviting people over? So invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. Invite those who cannot repay you. This is can be a challenging verse. Why do you invite people over? Now, Mrs. Green and I like to open our door and we invite people over. And honestly and truly, we do it with the expectation that we will not be repaid with an invitation into your house. No kidding, no exceptions. We do it because we like to bring groups of people together. That brings us joy. We like to have dinner where we can introduce people that have similar interests and see if they hit it off and maybe strike up a friendship. That brings us joy. We like to cook for other people. We find that to be, well, that brings us joy. It just does. And so we will invite people to our house and we will use the fancy pants china. We will have a nice meal, and we might use the china even if we have burgers off the grill. But we like having a house filled with people eating, and a meal in our house is not quick. If we invite you to supper, you're going to stay a while because, well, that's just what we do. Invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. What if, I'm just thinking here, what if your friends or your brothers or your relatives, what if they're poor, crippled, lame, or blind? What if? What reward do you receive for that? I don't know. I don't know. It's hard when you have others close to you. Now, I think when you have family that's struggling, that you should help them, but helping them is sometimes a challenge. How do you help individuals? I say that because when I was a young adult, my father struggled mightily with adulthood, and himself was homeless for a while. And I went down to San Antonio. I really would get to know him if I just kind of sprung it on him that surprise, I'm here in San Antonio. Let's get together for lunch. And he'd go to church with me. I'd meet him there like he was going to church every Sunday. I knew he wasn't. He wasn't there very often, but the pastor knew his name. That was made him happy. And I took him to lunch afterwards at a really nice Mexican restaurant that happened to be in the neighborhood where I grew up. It's a place where I have nice childhood memories. We couldn't afford to eat out very often, so this was not this was a once every couple of years kind of place growing up. So I like to go there when I get back into San Antonio, and they have outdoor seating, and then they have little smaller buildings, and we're sitting in one of these, and we're sitting up on a you go up some steps there, and parts of this restaurant used to be a Phillips 66 gas station. And I remember when you could sit at the counter and they still had the oil change pit in the back. And now they've bought several buildings and expanded several houses. It's a neighborhood place. And I'm up there, and my father gets up to go to the restroom. And the lady at the next table says, excuse me, sir. I said, yes, ma'am. That man you're eating with, is he homeless? Well, yes, ma'am. Actually, right now he is. He said, wow, I've always wanted to do that, to invite a homeless person to lunch. I just don't have the courage. And I said, well, ma'am, don't be too impressed by me, because he's my father. Um, I bought lunch for my dad at a nice restaurant, a place he would not otherwise have gone or been able to go. It's hard. It's hard when someone close to you is struggling. How do you help them? How do you help them? So this is where we are in this text. The location, when and where Jesus is at, that's very important. And then you have the meal here really having to do, the words here having to do with how are you honored and how are you repaid? How are you honored and how are you repaid? That's an interesting question. Um, it's challenging when you think about places of honor. Now, a lot of places, when fancy pants meals, when you show up, they'll have on the table place cards where it is that you are to be seated. The wedding I went to 10 days ago had, outside of the room where people ate, they had a chart with the table numbers and who was seated at each table. It was not a ginormous wedding. So you would have these tables, and so you'd know where to sit. And then when you got to the table, there'd be a place card there with your name on it. And it was made it really easy to know where you were supposed to sit. Now, at my table, there was a couple that was supposed to come, had a family emergency and couldn't be there. And so we shuffled our seats and had a great time. We sat in different parts before and during and after the meal just to get to know everybody there. It was a marvelous event. But I tell you that because if you show up and there's not a place of honor with your name on it, don't go swapping the cards. Stay in that lowest place. Sit where you are to be seated, even if it's the lowest place. And if you don't know, take the lowest place. Because if you do, regardless of who sits in the place of honor, you will gain special insight into the person that invited you. You will learn if that person has someone in particular to sit in that place of honor, right at the right hand or the left hand at the head of the table. You will learn about that person by whom they have chosen to sit at that place of honor. And you might learn that you were the one chosen to be there. And that's a pretty cool event. I've actually had that happen to me, much to my surprise, when I'm in a room and someone comes to me and takes me by the arm and by the hand and says, no, you're sitting with me, and then drags me to the front table. It really was quite an honor for that to happen. I didn't expect it. I mean, Pastors get invited to lots of things, and it's always an honor, really, to be in the room. It really is. Um, and I like to see who's close to the people that are hosting. That you learn a lot about them, and it makes me smile. Find joy in learning about other individuals more so than in celebrating yourself, because everyone who exalts himself, who celebrates himself, if you celebrate yourself, you will be humbled. But if you humble yourself, you will be celebrated. And even if it's not when you're in the room, even if it's, well, I remember seeing you there, but I should have invited you. I mean, don't worry about what happens on that event. The host has enough to worry about without worrying about you. And then if you're hosting, the lesson for the person hosting is this: pay attention to who you invite and why you've invited them. If you've invited somebody famous to dinner so that you can say, "Oh, look who was at my dinner," when they show up, if they show up, you've been repaid. It really has to do with finding our place in the world. And how do we find our place in the world? Jesus is in a house of, he is in the house of a ruler of the Pharisees. Everybody there is important. It's a wedding banquet. Everybody there is important. Everybody there has been invited by the ruler of the Pharisees. It's a big deal. Okay, so for everybody in the room, if you've been invited into the room, why are you sitting where you're sitting? Are you trying to honor yourself, or are you trying to allow others to be honored? Because if you are honoring yourself, you will be humbled. But if you humble yourself and honor others, you will be honored. It's a world in complete contrast to what it is that the world wants us to hear. And then likewise for the person hosting, if you're hosting so that you can get a big fancy invitation to a fancy place and you do get invited, you've been repaid. I wonder about this because I just wonder about this. I encourage you, if you've never done it, to invite into your home people who can't repay you. If you live near a university, find out who's working with the international students and offer to be somebody who can get to know them. Not every holiday is a big deal all around the world. I know this is going to sound crazy, but American Thanksgiving is not celebrated on mainland China. I know, crazy, isn't it? American Thanksgiving, not observed in Ghana, West Africa. Crazy. I know this because when I was a graduate student and we got to rent this beautiful little house just a couple miles off campus. And again, Mrs. Green and I show love by cooking for people. And we invited into our home, I mean, it was more than a dozen, 15 or 17. I can't remember if it was 17 people or 17 different languages spoken in our house. I think it was Mrs. Green and I were talking. We think it was 17 people and probably about 15 different languages spoken, keeping in mind that some people speak more than one language. And that was just amazing. We loved those meals. We loved hosting the international students, and they couldn't repay us. They just couldn't. They couldn't do it. And yet, I tell you, no regrets. What a blessing it was to have these individuals in our home. So there's the question: is approaching this text. So how do you approach this text? A couple of ways to approach it. First, how do you show love for others? How do you show love for others? This is a very important question. If you're invited to a meal, do you show love to others by letting them sit in places of honor while you yourself go and sit somewhere else? How do you show love for others? And how do you honor yourself? Maybe honor instead of showing love would be the better phrase. How do you honor others? How do you honor yourself? Because if you invite people over with the expectation that you'll be invited somewhere else, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's really not. That uh, for decades here in the United States, that formed a foundation of how people interacted with each other, how you got to know your neighbors. You would have dinner parties at each other's homes. And uh, my wife grew up in a home where her parents and the neighbors all had dinner parties very often. The kids played together in the street, went to school together. Uh, it was a different world than the one our kids grew up in. There's no harm done there. It's just that you don't have any honor other than doing that. Uh, when I'm invited to dinner at other people's homes, absolutely we accept. Um, and we often invite other people into our home for dinners. And we hope they accept as well. Uh, but why are you doing this? Are you doing this to build a community of faith and support a community of faith like a ruler of the Pharisees is in some part supposed to do? Or are you doing this to build camaraderie among your neighbors? What honor do you receive from this? Well, that's important for you to know when you're hosting. How do you honor others? How do you honor yourself? And here's the most important one. How do you honor God? How do you honor God? This is the inviting word of God. It's okay to invite others. Uh, I've been a part of churches that were growing, and I mean just growing so fast. We couldn't we could we filled space faster than we could build it, and I've been able to do that. I've had that privilege of a church that caught lightning and just had people flocking in the door more than once. And I've also been a part of churches like the congregation where I am now, which is a pretty small group. What's the difference? Here's really what I can tell you is from the pastor's point of view, the difference. The churches that are growing, the people in the church invite others to come to church. They invite others to come to church. That's the secret formula. If you want your congregation to grow, it's not about a dynamic preacher. It's not about a program. It's not about rock and roll music. It's about you enjoying your congregation so much that you want to share it with others. Because if you don't invite people to church, neither will anybody else. And I have to tell you, that's really the difference. When the people in the pews start inviting their friends and their neighbors, there's nothing the preacher could do to stop that growth. I've watched some preachers mess things up. But if they're not inviting people to church, there's nothing you can do. There's no advertising campaign. There's no fancy formula. There's no secret sermon. There's just nothing. It's about that invitation. So the different ways to preach it. You can take the different concepts of honor, honoring others, honoring yourself, honoring God, which is the ultimate question in these relationships we have with others and our relationship with ourselves. That's part of it. How do we honor God? Another way to look at it, I mean, I talk about the problem, the power of God, and the point. If you invite others, if you honor others, you will be exalted. The one who honors others is exalted, if not by anybody in the room, then on that day of the resurrection of the just, you will be exalted by God. If you show that reverence, that respect, that love, if you receive joy from their happiness, you will be honored by God. So, how do we exalt ourselves? How many people have a podcast? Put your hands down. It's easier to ask how many people don't have a podcast. You can joke about that. Because that is the problem, isn't it? We necessarily are the center of our story, of the story of our life. And done right, God is supposed to be at the center of the story of our life. It's easier said than done, but it's not very easily said. How are we doing there? So there's a problem. The power of God is to lift up and to bless. And to bless, what's the point? We are to honor God and to honor others. There's your point. So these are some different ways to approach it. If you are teaching in a group setting, encourage others to participate in the conversation. Break the ice by talking about, have you ever been invited to a fancy wedding? I mean, a 7 p.m. formal wedding. I mean, you showed up in a suit and tie and you gentlemen were underdressed. Ladies, you showed up in a pretty dress, but it was not a cocktail dress. You were underdressed. Have you ever been to one of those weddings? Because those weddings, those are the 7 p.m. Saturday night weddings. That's a fancy pants wedding. At least Emily Post says it's supposed to be. Talk about times you've been invited, and what a privilege it was to be in the room and see who was there. Was there ever a time that you were invited to an event only to find out that you were asked to sit with the people of honor, the host or the people being celebrated? What was that experience like? What's your experience with the poor, the homeless, the lame, the crippled? What's your experience with them? The poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. That's the line. The poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. How do you show respect for those individuals? When you pass by someone on the street, do you engage them in conversation, make eye contact with them, or do you just brush on by, just get by them as quickly as you can? And sometimes that's appropriate, sometimes not. It's challenging. It's very, very challenging. So if you are in a lesson, that's how I encourage you to begin the lesson, talking about times people have been invited to weddings, times they've been invited to dinners or events where people are being honored. And at times they found themselves honored to be sitting with somebody of prominence, or the person they're sitting with the honoree of an event. Those are pretty fascinating events. But I think there's a rich ground here for us to approach. Now, I know on the calendar, on the clock, I have a little over 10 minutes left. I don't think I'm going to use all that time. So I do want to talk about, this is the last sermon in the sermon series. And when we come up in September, you'll notice if you go to my website that September 7th, I have a text that's not going to be in your lectionary. That's a Sunday where our youth at the church actually lead worship. It's a communion Sunday, so I will be there to celebrate the sacrament of communion. But we have a couple of kids, high school students, who are working very hard to prepare their remarks for that day. I won't call it a sermon, but remarks. I know there are some congregations where they'll go, "What? No, you can't do that." But we do. It's a tradition of the congregation that predates me by a lot. And people who have preached what they call the senior sermons, and people who have heard them, they have very special, very fond memories of the college students. And I'm not taking that away from them. So that'll happen on Sunday, September 7th. Sunday, September 7th, where I'm preaching. That is also what we call Sunday School Rally Day. So we'll have, I think, a piece go in the mail. We'll have a phone, email message go out reminding people we want you to come and invite a friend to Sunday school. We have a fair number of people that travel over the summertime, and they just get out of the habit of showing up, or they begin participating in worship online. There's value in coming to do that in person, so we set aside one Sunday a year, okay, more than one actually, by my count, at least a few times that we do this, to encourage people to get back in the habit of making your way to Sunday school. In worship service, even in a mid-size or a smaller church, sometimes it's hard to know everybody that's in the sanctuary. A part of the power, the magic of Sunday school is it's a place where everybody can know your name. When I was in North Carolina, I was privileged to oversee a season of tremendous growth in Christian education. And that was the secret. We started new classes so that everybody could be in a room where somebody knew their name. Now, one teacher in particular who had a class of about 25 or 30 people, she was mad at me my first year there. She was mad at me the whole time I was there, because in her mind, I was supposed to grow Sunday school. And as a result, her class was supposed to have 100, 150, 200 people in it. And in her mind, if her class didn't grow, Sunday school did not benefit. And my goodness, she got the ear of my boss and the ear of those who did my personnel reviews, and she certainly knew how to let her voice be heard. But I don't know why I'm off on that tangent. Sunday school is important because people can know your name in Sunday school. So if you have, that's where I got off on that tangent. So if you haven't already, invite people to Sunday school. In the United States, September 7 is the week after the Labor Day holiday. That typically is when we start thinking of fall. Here in Southeast Texas, the heat of August will persist until early, probably mid-October. It pretty reliably, uncomfortably hot until about the third week of October. And then the humidity settles down and we start getting to have an autumn season. And that will last right through February. We'll have about 3 or 4 weeks of wintertime, but we won't have them all in a row. No telling when they come. Sometimes November, December, January, February, anytime in those 4 months, we're likely to have some or all of our 3 weeks of wintertime. So anyway, that's what's coming up then. But the month of September is really going to be a series on prayer, a series on prayer. So the 3 sermons that I have in my notes, if you go to davidhgreen.com and look for Pastor Abilities, you'll find the 14th, 21st, 28th, prayer without an answer without prayer, and the power of praise. And that's going to be an important series of lessons. But September 7th will also, when I come together on Tuesday morning next week, I will have something on something for us having to do with prayer. And I will pick one of the lectionary texts. I regret I don't have it for you right now, but that's what's I'm going to queue up for September 7th. So somebody else is doing that order of worship where I work, but I'm still going to have something for you on prayer. Now, I'd like to hear from you. If you find value in this time, this hour and a half that I put together on Tuesday mornings, I actually write this on Monday afternoons, practice it before I'm here on Tuesday, and then have this presentation for you. Let me know. Send me an email, if you would, please, to david@davidhgreen.com. There are a couple of variables that I may bring into play. I committed to doing this format for the first 8 weeks. This is week number 8. So I'm going to be revisiting the format over the next 10 days, 2 weeks. And different options. One option is that I turn this into a subscription-only group coaching so that individuals who pay a monthly subscription fee will have access to this behind a paywall. I'd still do a very short 5-minute or so introduction to it online, but I wouldn't give all of this information. Another option is that I continue to make the Bible study free to everybody, but then have a small group of preachers and teachers in group coaching. And I tell you that because while I've been doing this free, and it certainly supports my work at the church, I can tell you that by the end of the day today, my sermon for Sunday will be outlined based on the things that we've already talked about this morning. And if you've seen this, I'll bet you can guess what my outline will be. So how do I help others? I'm doing this at this stage of life. It's not exactly a retirement hobby, but I am formally retired. I'm doing this in part because I would like to see a little bit of income from it. I'm not needing to realize a lot of income, and that's okay because I'm not able to commit a lot of hours to it. But I'd like to hear from you. If you are someone who participates in this study, if you are a Bible teacher or a preacher, and you have found value in this, let me hear from you. And here's what I'd love for you to tell me. What value have you found in this time? How have I helped you? And more importantly, how can I help you more? How can I help you more? I have the benefit of learning from mentors who shaped and changed my life and my work in ministry forever. And I want to share not my wisdom, their wisdom with you. And how can I help you more? If you are a preacher, do you need help with other parts of the life of the church? I've done that for 30 plus years. I can help you with that. If you are a teacher or a preacher, I've done literally thousands upon thousands of sermons and lessons and speeches. I can help you with that. I can help you writing them, and I can even help you learn how to present more effectively. Um, how can I help you? What is causing you stress? And what's a way that I can help you with that? Because I very much want this time to be of benefit to you. So I see by the timer here on the screen that we've been together for about an hour and 25 minutes, not quite an hour and a half. Uh, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. I just cannot tell you how much I appreciate your faithfulness to be here with me and my prayers for your work. Regardless of where you are in life, regardless of what you do with this lesson, if it is for self edification so that you can grow closer to God, deepen your faith, I hope that's a blessing you receive. If you are looking to teach or preach more effectively, I pray that be something you can receive. So reach out to me, David at davidhgreen.com, and let me know how I can be of more support to you. But please know my thoughts, my prayers, and my very best wishes are with you. I pray God bless you and all that you do, and that God be blessed by you. I'm David Green. This is Pastor Abilities, and I'll see you next week. Be blessed, my friend.